Computer. Okay. All right. Time for us to begin. We're in Habakkuk chapter 3, and I have us starting with verse 2. Now, those of you who are taking this for credit, there should have been some papers due today. So they need to be turned in also. So we're looking at then the prayer of of Habakkuk then, and that's what we got to verse 2. And if we look at verse 2, there's three petitions, three things that he's going to talk about in this verse. He's going to talk about revive then, revive thy work. And then he's going to talk about in the midst of the years. And then he mentions that again, in the midst of the years, make known. And then he says the wrath. So we're going to talk about those three things there. First, we're going to talk about revive the work of God. In verse 2, he says, revive thy work. Okay, so he's talking about the work then that has been gone before, and Habakkuk wants it then to start again. Revive that work. And it would have been work that was equal or superior to the work that had been recorded before. And in the midst of the year means that at the present time, not at the end of time, but at the present time.
So what's number
2? Okay, that was all number 1. Number 2, we're talking about he asked for understanding. In the midst of the years, he wants to make it known. Okay, so that midst of the years then would be the same midst of the years that he talked about before, the same time period. Then here is then Habakkuk wants God to give him a revelation. Make it known. And then thirdly, the wrath that he's making known here. Wrath, remember mercy. This means agitation or disturbance. And Judah faced a time when their very foundations of her faith in God would be shaken. The temple would be destroyed, or citizens carried away into captivity. And so he's asking for divine mercy during that time. All right, now in verse 3, we're going to talk about verses 3 through 7. We're going to talk about the vision of God's coming. All right, and then in verse 3, the fact of his coming. So here is then a prophetic vision of God in all his glory. And God here is Eloah, Eloah. So he's using the title, an ancient title for God. And then he said, God is coming from Tema. This is on the island, not island, it's on the peninsula of the southern border of Judah. this would be then on the route that God brought the people of from Sinai to Canaan. So he also says then, and the Holy One from Mount Paran. And we see there the holy then, and remember that he is holy. What is it? 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15, something like that. And then Leviticus chapter 11, verses 44 and 45. And 19:2.
In Leviticus.
That's right. So being holy, then, he can show no partiality in judgment. He would judge Judah and then turn on the godless Chaldeans. All right, now the glory of his coming, that's chapter 3, 3b through 4. The glory then that he's talking about, his glory covered the heavens and the earth. That's like a blanket then. And the praise that he's talking about here is the attributes of God, which are worthy of praise. Now, this is more than the glory of God in Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. This is talking about a display, all of that, display of grand acts of deliverance. Let's see. And then in verse 4, he talks about the horns coming out of his hands, or rays of light that come forth from his hands. It'd be like laser beams, can penetrate the darkest recesses and strongest fortresses. This is the readiness of God to act on behalf of his people. So here is the invisible and awesome power of the coming one. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 16, Paul says, who only hath immortality dwelling in the light, which no man can approach unto. So this is the kind of idea that he's talking about. All right, then verses 5 through 7, we're going to talk about the effects of his coming. Let's see, 5. Oh, verse 5, it talks about the pestilence. Some translations may have plague. Plagues are the plague. And so Habakkuk sees the Lord bringing destruction with him as he comes. Then he stood, verse 6. He paused before the battle to survey the scene. American Standard has in it that the earth trembled. Let's see. The mountains scattered, and the hills bowed, and his ways are everlasting. So the mountains and the hills that we're talking about here they're collapsing. These mountains are collapsing. The hills are collapsing. And it's a binding of the earth together. Everlasting then is talking about is a contrast that he's using, Habakkuk's using here, between the destruction of the holy hills and the execution of the eternal programs of God.
Contrast between destruction of the holy hills and what?
And the execution of the eternal purpose of God, eternal programs of God. Understand God's eternal program now that he's talking about is bringing Christ into this world. He's not going to be thwarted from that. And then time passed. In time past, God had demonstrated his wrath on Egypt and those nations that were against his people. Palestine, Assyria, and in the future, Babylon. And that's what he's talking. I saw the tents of the Cushans, afflictions, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. Cushan is probably a abbreviation for Cushan Rishathaim. You got the Cushan right there, and Rishathaim is Rishatham.
M or N?
M as in mother.
Okay, Thim?
Thaim. And this was, you have to go back to the book of Judges, and you can find them in Judges chapter 3. And the Midianites were also in Judges chapter 6. So we see that they were powers, but then God smashed them also. the tense that he uses here, the word tense.
T-E-N-T-S.
Yes. That just shows that in the light of God, tense aren't anything. They're vulnerable. All right, and then there are verses 8 through 15. We're going to have an acknowledgement of God's victory. Now, in the middle of verse 8, he's going to go and talk about God in the second person. Now, in verses 8 through 11, he's going to talk about the impact on nature, and he's going to use those nature things, okay? The rivers, the sea, the horses and the chariots, mountains, the sun and the moon. He's going to talk about those types of things. And they were all affected by the coming of God. Now remember that God had affected the seas. I'm going to call them seas, but the Red Sea when the children of Israel passed over, then the Jordan River when they passed through. So all of these things then that he's talking about. The point here is Habakkuk is that there's no geographical barrier that can protect the adversary from God's wrath. At the end of verse 8, he talks about the chariots of salvation. And that is the warrior in a chariot to conquer his enemies, which would be God's enemies. God is coming to rescue his people. And he's going to use the bow and the arrow, and they're inexhaustible. Well, and he's going to empty it out. Okay. Every weapon, God is pledging every weapon at his disposal to the destruction of the enemies. Then he's going to talk about the mountains again. This would be the earth would melt into rivers of volcanic lava. Then he's going to talk about also how the earth, the mountains, quaked in pain. And they trembled. That's verse 10 there. And the overflowing of the water passed by. That's a hurricane. And then the sun and the moon stood still. They ceased to give, or ceased to function, to give light. They could not compete with God's weaponry. All right, verses 12 through 15. We see the explanation of the disaster. All right, here was then the upheaval. Why the upheaval of nature? Was God expressing irrational anger against his own creation? And the answer is no. All nature trembles under the weight of his footsteps. 12a. Then the thresh, then the heathen in anger. This is the threshing floor to describe what God would do to his enemies. Then in verse 13, he talks about the rescue mission for God's people. Salvation of thy people, even the salvation which thou hast anointed. Okay. So here's the Messiah, the anointed one. And I think that's a messianic prophecy then. Isaiah 9 and verse 7. 2 Samuel chapter 7. Now, how would God do this? Now, notice it says, the woundest the head out of the house of the wicked. So here's the head of the family, of course. This could have some then references also back to Balaam in Moab and those type of things in Numbers 24. Psalms 110 verses 5 and 6. David prophesied that a king would strike through the heads of many countries. So a singular champion of God's people wins the ultimate victory over the leader of the wicked opposition.
Say that again. Repeat.
A singular champion of God's people wins the ultimate victory over the wicked opposition. So Christ is going to win over Satan. Let's see. He talks about then the results of the struggle, set forth as a geographical metaphor. Discovering of the fountain to the neck. Okay. Foundations, yes, I see that now. Appearing to be the legs of the chief of the wicked, laying bare. Those legs are suggested exposing them to attack, undercutting them.
Where's the see the foundation into the neck.
It may not. It may be in some of the other translations.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And then unto the neck suggests total assault, which would utterly destroy the chief of the wicked. Now, in chapter 3 and verse 14, we find the picture changes a little bit. Okay. The head of the villagers, the American Standard has warriors. So this is Satan's command of vast unfenced areas, as well as walled cities. And God pierces with his own stave the head of the army.
God does what?
God pierces with his own staves the head of the army. That's Christ then, resurrection. Goes back to Genesis 3:15, and those type of things. 2 Corinthians 5:21, he became sin for us who knew no sin. And it says then also, and they came out of the whirlwind to scatter me. Okay.
Is that referring to Habakkuk?
Yeah. Apparently, Habakkuk had felt the brunt of Satan's attacks. Habakkuk recalls past deliverances of God. The Red Sea deliverance. So here's Habakkuk having confidence that God would ride with his chariots through the waters of the opposition.
God would ride where? Through the waters?
Through the waters of opposition and persecution, because he uses that idea of waters through there. Through the sea with his fine horses. God is ultimately victorious.
That's the thing, right?
That's really the book of Revelation. If you'll keep that in mind in the book of Revelation, you'll understand that.
Actually,
All right.
I think it's the theme of the Bible.
Yes, really. Past deliverance bolster Habakkuk's faith in the final victories. Okay. Now, verses 16 through 19, we're going to find a commitment to God.
16 through 19?
Through the rest of the chapter.
You said a commitment to God?
Mm-hmm. So really, this is a response to this vision that he's had.
To Habakkuk's vision.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, Habakkuk acknowledging that he had heard what the Lord had communicated through the vision and the word. See, my belly trembled and my lips quivered at the voice.
You saying he acknowledges that he heard?
Yes.
Okay, understood, whatever.
Yes. But he could not respond.
Habakkuk couldn't.
No. Habakkuk could not, because he was physically traumatized by this divine revelation. Now notice the effect that it had upon him physically. First, his body trembled. Second, his lip quivered. Did you get number 2?
Mm-hmm.
And thirdly, then he felt his bones were rotting away within him. The enemy was coming, and it was a terrible day. So Habakkuk is now resigned to the invasion which God announced in chapter 1. God would ultimately crush Satan and all his host. And this enabled Habakkuk and all other believers to maintain their faith. Even in the time of despair.
You said it gave Habakkuk and other enabled them to what?
Maintain their faith.
Maintain.
Deliverance was certain, but it would only come after the judgment. In this case, the Chaldean, here's the...
Not judgment day, but the judgment God's going to pass on.
Right, that's right. I think there's some looking forward, deliverance will come after judgment. If you're faithful, then deliverance will come after the judgment day. You'll be with God for all of eternity. I think there's some of that, involved in this too. All right, so verses 18 and 19. Habakkuk, let's see. Wait a minute, did I talk about verse 17? No, I did not. All right, verse 17. Let me go back up and get 17. He's talking about the terrible devastation that would come to Judah by the Chaldean invasion. The fig tree. Let's see, he mentions the fig tree, the vineyards and the olive groves and the grain fields would not yield. The flocks and the herds would be cut off. And there wouldn't be any luxuries nor necessities of life would be available. Pretty bad. All right, now let's talk about the last two verses and the commitment of Habakkuk. Habakkuk could accept the coming judgment now that he had seen the ultimate manifestation of God's justice. Habakkuk could accept the coming judgment now that he had seen the ultimate manifestation of God's justice. Now, material comforts could be removed, but as long as Habakkuk had life in his body, he resolved to rejoice in God. He calls God the God of my salvation. So it is personal with him, the God of my salvation, not somebody else's salvation.
That's what David called him.
Now he also knows that, and he understands that God would restore the land back to his people. You know, Jeremiah is told to buy land because he knows that the land will be given back, and that land will be then Jeremiah's when they come back from the captivity. All right, the revelation of the ultimate victory of God gives spiritual strength to Habakkuk. He made his feet like hind feet, deer feet. The Lord would help him walk on high places, conquering one obstacle after another. So here's Habakkuk's personal faith in God and his firm commitment to remain faithful to him. So notice on the last part of 19, it says then, to the chief singer on my stringed instruments. This then suggests a psalm. The term the chief musician is used 55 times in the superscriptions of Psalms. And this is the only place where this is used outside of the book of Psalms. So it was to be accompanied with stringed instruments. And it was with my stringed instruments. And Habakkuk affirms that he himself would furnish the accompaniment for the singing of the psalm. So here is then the prophet feeling qualified to take part in the public performance of this piece. So he must have been one of the Levitical, or from the tribe of Levi, whom was entrusted with that service. All right. Zephaniah. All right. The name Zephaniah means God hides or God has hidden. There are 3 others Zephaniahs in the Old Testament. First Chronicles 6, Jeremiah 21, and Zechariah 6. Now, this prophet is said to be the son of Cushai, who was a descendant of Hezekiah, King Hezekiah. Thus, Zephaniah was of royal lineage. Most likely lived in Jerusalem. Which means he was probably kin to Daniel and the 3 Hebrew youths. Now, it talks about then in the days of Josiah, okay? In the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah. So if we look at then when he's prophesying, he would be prophesying with and contemporaries with Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And then some of the minor prophets also. But he's prophesying during that time. Okay, this is before Nineveh falls. So we're going to give it a date of 630. All right, the times of Zephaniah were rotten. Judah is characterized by pride, falsehood, iniquity, extortion, and idolatry. They were unashamed. I think that's Jeremiah talked about, could they not blush anymore? All right, so the purpose of this book is to warn Judah of the approaching doom. And the ultimate purpose is to warn sinners and give encouragement to those who repent. Now, the book does deal with the wrath of God, but it also promises redemption.
Promises redemption.
That's right.
And what did you say about warn sinners and gives encouragement?
To those who repent.
I forgot what I was frightened, but promises redemption. Got it. Okay.
Okay? Yeah. All right, now 53 verses in this book. 47 are predictive. That makes it the most predictive book of the Bible. Somebody has figured out 89% of this book is predictive. Do what? Do you have any questions? All right, the theme of this book is the day of God. Chapter 1 and verse 14 would be the great day of the Lord. There may be other places that he's using that terminology too. All right, outline of the book. The looking within. Now, let me give you a little bit. This is chapters 1 through chapter 2, 3. This is the sin of Judah. All right. Point number 2, looking around. This is the sentence against the nations. This is 2:4 through 3:8. And then number 3, looking ahead. The salvation of the remnant. Chapters 3, 9 through 20. All right. And it says, the word of the Lord which came unto Zephaniah, the son of Cushan. So he's part then of that fellowship to whom God revealed his word. And then he would reveal that to God's people, that word to God's people. Right? It is not speculation, opinion, or prognostication. All right, God's using this man to communicate to his people. Take a little break.
Thank you. Where's your hands?
Here,
It's in the tray.
have that one.
you open it? Oh, goodness, what is it? I don't know. Do you want some? What are you reading? Candy.
I bought me some today.
Mm.
How do you spell unique?
Eunuch, like Philip in the eunuch?
Yeah.
EUNUCH, I believe. Yes, EUNUCH.
Okay.
No more. Okay, Mark.
Here,
Some water.
thank you some of that. Are these any good? I don't want water.
No, it's for me.
Both of them? Okay.
I'm tiny. That's enough sugar for me for a month.
All right, time for us to start back. Now, the reason I say that, if we go back to Zephaniah, and he's going to trace these back, and he's going to prophesy in the days of Josiah, but he is also then tracing his lineage back. He was the son of Cushai, was the grandson of Gildah, great-grandson of Amorah, and the great-grandson of Hezekiah. Now, if we look at Isaiah 39 and verse 7, Isaiah tells Hezekiah that he would have sons who would, and it says, and thy sons that issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, they shall take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. And so that's Daniel and those three Hebrew youths. Okay. So that's why I say he was probably kin to Daniel. And Hezekiah was a good king, but notice also that Zephaniah prophesied in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah. Now, Josiah was a great king also, and he had a lot of reform. And if you go back and study Jeremiah, you'll find that the Reformation was taking place during this time. But Josiah was 8 years old when he became king. And I think through the influence of Jeremiah and then the high priest, you'll see that Josiah then was a great king, and the reform that was taking place during his time. All right. What's the matter?
Can't write.
All right. So now let's look at verses 2 and 3. And it's kind of a general threat. So we talked about he was going to consume all things from off the earth, saith the Lord. This is the kind of that great day that we're going to talk about in verse 14, the great day of the Lord. And that's another way to refer to this. So, and we see in chapter 2, I think it is, the verses, 4 through whatever, that he's going to prophesy against the nations. So this is a kind of a general type introduction to the book about how he's going to, here's the warning from the prophet. And God always gave warning, okay? And then he says, I will utterly consume, or I will consume man and beast. So here is then having a great impact on the whole earth. This verse 3 is opposite of the order of Genesis creation. You have man, beast, birds, and fish. But even the fish wouldn't survive this. Now, God promised Noah that he would never destroy the earth with water as long as the earth stood. So I think this has reference, though, to the destruction of Jerusalem, and then the other nations when we look at that aspect of it. But this also has a forward-looking then to the day when the world be destroyed, and we need to understand then that it will be destroyed, and we need to be ready for that. We need to be ready to meet God. Then it also says that the stumbling block, if you'll look in verse 3, the New American Standard Bible has ruins. God's creation was good, but man has turned it into evil purposes. And the word then that we're talking about, the stumbling blocks or ruins, describes the ruined state of every institution. Religion, government, education, and family. Then he also mentions in this, and the wicked and I will cut off from man off the land. I think there's also the idea that the images, man created these images, likened unto these things, man and four-footed beast and these type of things. And these also would be destroyed. All right, so he also talks about with the wicked. Okay, so here's that destruction of wicked humanity. In Matthew chapter 13 and verse 41, the Son of Man shall send forth his angels, gather out of the kingdom all things that cause stumbling, and them that do iniquity. Kind of like the same thing. All right, now he's going to talk about verses 4 through 18, the judgment of Judah. So this is prior then to that destruction of Judah. Okay, so that's why we date it when we do.
Of Judah or Nineveh?
Judah.
Judah. You said something earlier about Nineveh.
Well, we're going to get into the. I did?
Maybe that was during Habakkuk.
Well, it's going to look forward to that. We're going to talk about those nations, those Gentile nations. But understand, I think it's going to be, okay, I'm going to destroy Judah, but then those oppressors are going to also be destroyed. I think this is also the same thing in the book of. See, when we talk about these prophets that prophesied during this time, their prophecy is pretty much the same. There may be a few years difference in them, but they're prophesying pretty much.
Well, I don't understand the destruction of Judah when Judah is where Christ is going to come from. Are you talking about the land of Judah or the tribe of Judah?
I'm talking about the land most.
Okay, like their possessions.
Yes.
The physical stuff.
Right. The temple will be destroyed.
Okay.
All right. But that's kind of like when
not the people of Judah.
No, they're going to be carried away into captivity, but they're going to come.
Punishment.
Yeah. And they're going to come back. And that's then.
So Daniel came from Judah.
Yes.
Probably.
I think that's right. Because he's Hezekiah. And I meant to look it up in Matthew chapter 1.
Judah.
I think that Matthew chapter 1 there, I meant to look that up and make sure that if Hezekiah then he's not mentioned. Manasseh begat Ammon, and Ammon begat Josiah. Josiah begat Jeconiah. Jotham began. Hezekiah is not mentioned either. And then after they were brought into Babylon. See, when we talk about the last three that we have, the last three minor prophets, they're going to be post-exilic. That means after the 70 years, it was prophesied by Jeremiah. Then they're going to come back and they're going to prophesy about them rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the walls. This is also Nehemiah and Ezra. So we have 5 books really dealing with that. Ezra and Nehemiah, then Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Those 3. Okay.
Yeah, because Hezekiah was the son of Ahaz, and he was the 13th king of Judah.
Yeah. So usually it was the oldest son.
He's in the genealogy of Jesus, so he'd have to be Judah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if he was.
And his wife's name was Hephzibah.
If he was in.
But it says he issued out of Manasseh.
Yes.
House of David.
That's another Manasseh. That's not.
Okay.
That's not.
His son was Manasseh.
Yeah.
That's right. I remember that now.
You got to understand.
When it says issue, it means child.
That's right. There's more than one. That's what we talk about. More than one Zephaniah. All right. So we got our time period kind of straight in our minds now. Okay. Now where was I? We were talking about verses. All right. We got through with verse 3. We're starting into this judgment of Judah then.
You said it was prior to the destruction.
Yeah. All right. So he's going to be emphatic about his announcement. I will also stretch out my hand upon Judah, upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem. I'll cut off the remnant of Baal. And here are then those who are burdened with unforgivable sins. The reason they are is because they won't turn from God. They will not repent, okay? And they will face the wrath of God. And it says, I will stretch out my hand upon Judah. That stretched forth then is a metaphor suggesting that God would move against them with all the forces at his disposal. Now keep in mind, when you're reading this, what God had done to Egypt and how he had destroyed Egypt with those 10 plagues. You got to understand that that was economic destruction. I mean, those people had nothing when God got through with them. And so that's pretty much what he's talking about here. And he talks about Jerusalem. Well, Jerusalem was a walled city, and they thought it would not fall. And then it says also that he would cut off the remnant of Baal. That means they would no longer serve idolatry. So Jerusalem was to be a purified place, and it needed to be maintained, so he would cut them off.
You saying they would no longer serve Baal?
Yes. And that is, I've got several points here, and that's number one. The remnant of Baal would be cut off. That's an old Canaanite idol. You go back to Josiah, then purged that from Jerusalem. And then the names of Chemarims with a priest, and that is then,
Number 2.
Yes, this is number 2.
Names of
Chemarith.
Camerons. Okay.
All right. This was the priest then, idolatrous priests of the high places. They were once influential, and they would be forgotten. Second Kings. (23, 5, and 8). And number 3. They worship the host of heaven. That's verse 5. And that would be cut off. And this is from the Assyrian influence. King Ahaz introduced worship of the Queen of Heaven. Jeremiah 7:18. Right, under the law of Moses, this was a capital offense. Deuteronomy 4:19. Now, those in the Jerusalem, those who stayed behind, or those who went down to Egypt during the captivity, during the Babylonian siege, they continued to offer, even in Egypt, they would continue to offer to these idols.
So those left behind in Jerusalem?
Yes, they went down. Well, they escaped when they saw the Babylons coming down. They escaped to Egypt. They carried Jeremiah down there with them too, and they
To Egypt.
Yes, and they continued their idolatrous worship down there. They didn't learn. Now, astrology is a modern day adaptation of this ancient paganism. Horoscopes and being guided by the stars is all a part of that. Now, the shrines to the sun, the moon, and the stars and the planets, this has been confirmed in the cuneiform text.
And an archaeological.
Yes, that's right. That's what this is. This would be proof from outside the biblical text. This would be. And when they did this, they were making mockery of the priestly role of the people of Israel.
When they had their own priests?
And when they were doing this, serving these other idols.
Okay.
Another Amber Alert.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a different. Well, no, it's not the same one. All right, number 4. Judgment will fall on those who bow down and swear to God and also swear to Malcolm. So this Malcolm is an alternative for Molech. And that's the chief god of Ammon. Okay.
It's a what of Moloch?
It's an alternative spelling.
Is it God of Ammon?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
All right, so in antiquity, people would swear by the name of the deity that he regarded as supreme. So by swearing to God and Malcolm,
Simultaneous?
yes, was to place these two deities on the same level. And God that's not God approved. God's a jealous God. All right, number 5. All right. Those who turn back, verse 6, from serving God, sins of omission and sins of commission. Backsliders. They were just indifferent. And then also in 6b, the last one, this would be number 6, I think. Seek and inquire. Okay, those who have not sought for the Lord nor inquired for him. Okay, there's no conscious effort to have divine fellowship or guidance.
Now say that again. I'm trying to write down what the verse says so I can refer to it.
Okay.
Sought the Lord nor inquired. Okay, now what? Say it again.
There's no conscious effort to have divine fellowship and guidance. Right now, in verse 7, the nearness of the day. Nearness of the day, verse 7.
This is not number 7.
No, we're through with.
Okay, we're through now.
This is verse 7.
Okay.
The nearness of the day. He says, hold your peace. All manner of opposition must stop immediately. Talk to the hand, we would say today. All right, now notice he says in verse 7 there, for the day of the Lord is at hand. That means it's close by.
Okay.
Grace period is over. All right. On that day, God would manifest his sovereignty over all men. On that day, he would enforce sanction on his covenant people.
So this is really talking about Babylon coming and taking them away.
That's right. Now, see, God's giving them ample warning that Babylon is coming. Now, if we read Jeremiah and other books like that, they don't think that's going to happen.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Jeremiah didn't think
No, Jeremiah says it's going to happen.
But
the people and the false prophets and those type of things are saying no. And see, Jeremiah was thrown in prison because they thought he was disheartening the people. Okay. And so that's why Jeremiah was thrown into the miry pit, but he's not telling them. He says, when they come, just submit to them, go into captivity, do what you need to do, and just, submit to the Babylonians, and everything will be all right. And in 70 years, you'll be able to come home.
Like Daniel did. Daniel actually.
Well, Daniel really didn't come home.
No, but he submitted in
That's
all
right.
the ways he could.
That's right. He did. And notice how he prospered then when he was in not only Babylon's kingdom, but also in the Medo-Persian
he continued.
Yes. So, he lived a good long life too, because he was probably about 15, maybe younger, something like that when he was, but you figured from then he was 70 years in captivity there with the Babylons, and then for a few more years in the Medo-Persians. So he had to be close to 90, 80, 90, so something like that. Yeah, during that time. All right. Now, number two that we talked about number one there, and that was that was first we declared the day of God is at hand.
Oh.
Okay. That's verse 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
The nearness of the day.
Okay. Now he's going to describe the day.
That's number 8.
Verse
8.
No. Well, 7.
Okay, now we're going to describe the day.
Yeah, that's his point number 2 then. He paints a gruesome picture. And the destruction of Judah and Jerusalem is likened to a sacrifice. You got to understand the sacrifices back then. Okay? There was that which was offered to God and burnt to God. Only the burnt offerings were totally consumed, but there was partially consumed. And then there was the priests that ate of, and the people that ate of this thing. Okay? So he's likening to that. Those who ate of the sacrificial meal were holy, purified. So all was in readiness for the great sacrificial destruction of Jerusalem to begin. All right, now in verses 8 through 13, he's going to talk about the extent of the destruction. All right. The first class is all people. Okay. This is verse number 8 and 9. It shall come to pass in the days of the Lord sacrifice that I will punish the prince, the kings. Now he's going to talk about those as we go through here, but it's going to be no person, no sinner within the nation would escape.
So it's talking about all people?
Yes. This is still under number 1. All right.
Okay.
Now, under that one, we're going to have another first, okay?
Under that same one?
Yeah, we're still under...
First class.
Yeah.
Okay.
He mentions those by rank, okay? The princes. The national leaders. He mentions also that the king's son. So rank and riches are no protection against what was coming. Then another group.
Class number 2?
Yeah, no, we haven't got to the grass.
Okay.
Well, this is this is number 2 under that number 1. Okay, you have the rich and those. Now he's going to visit the sinners. Okay, so we're still under.
Okay, class number 1.
Yeah. Okay. He's going to punish then the sinners, those clothed in foreign apparel is what I have. Clothed with strange apparel is what the King James says, or foreign apparel, the margin says. All right. Now, they were trying to be like the nations round about them. But God had some specific things that they were to wear. Certain cloth that they were to wear or not wear.
Or to mix it.
Yeah. And they were not being distinctive people. So they were abandoning the faith of their fathers. And it could be that this foreign apparel was wearing clothes devoted to certain idols. So you have two possibilities there. All right, now we're still under that first group, and he's going to talk about another. This I think would be number 3. Okay, under that number 1.
Right.
Okay, and he's going to talk about those who would leap on the threshold. And this was a Philistine practice.
Palestine and Philistine, same thing. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Luck or fate or fortune, which was not subject to the oversight of the Lord.
That's what it meant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think if you go back when Dagon, that'd be 1 Samuel, when they captured the ark,
Mm-hmm.
and Dagon fell, they would no longer, those priests from Dagon would no longer step on the threshold. And I think that's what this has some reference to too. The background of this would be, and they were accepting these things. All right, and then that also talks about those, they fill their master's houses with violence and deceit. Yeah, this is still under that first group. Yeah.
Now, say that again.
They filled
fill master's houses
with violence and deceit. This was taking property, seizing property of those that were poor and less fortunate. And this is against God's law too. All right, number 2. Now go back all the way. We're going.
Class number 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, now judgments on all sections of the city. This is verses 10 and 11.
Gotcha.
All right. So here's the cry from the fish gate.
This is number 1 under this.
Yeah. And the fish gate is on the north side of the city.
You're saying fish, like
FISH. That's what it's called.
Is it one word? Oh, I see. I got it. And say what was that?
That's the north side of the city. And since Babylon was coming from the north, this would be the first group that would be attacked. All right. Then he talks about the howl of the inhabitants, verse 11 of Mikdash.
Number 2.
Yep. This is the second quarter of Jerusalem. right? And we don't know exactly where this is. And then he talks about, let's see, let me get number 3.
All they fear silver.
He talks about here in this book about the great crushing of the hills. Verse 10. Crushing from the hills, latter part of that. I don't know why he went back up there. But this is the breaking, crushing from the hills.
Okay.
All right, this is the breaking down of idols on the hills surrounding Jerusalem.
Okay.
Then Mikdash.
Number 4.
Well, we're going back up to number 2 on this one.
Wow.
I don't know why he's done this, but he's done this. And this is a shallow valley to the west of Jerusalem. All right, and this would be where the people of Canaan gathered. And they would carry their silver there.
That's why it says that bear silver are cut off.
Yeah.
That's verse 11.
This is a derogatory term of the merchants.
So is this number 4?
I would call this number 4.
Okay, so wait a minute. And what did he say about the silver?
This is a derogatory term for the merchants. The dishonest business practices like the Canaanites. They would be cut off. So here's the religious and commercial leadership.
All of this.
Would face the wrath of God. All right, now go back to number 3. This is big number 3, okay? This is
class number.
Judgment on all sinners. Verses 12 and 13. It says, then I will search through Jerusalem with candles and punish the men that are settled on their lees. So let's talk about those then that are in Jerusalem. He's searching through Jerusalem with candles. Sinners would not be able to find a hiding place. Lees, the L-E-E-S.
Mm-hmm.
This is then that which is allowed, that solid matter that is allowed to settle at the bottom of a jar. Right? Wine would be left on the lees for a while to pick up flavor and strength before being strained. Right? If left too long on the lees, the wine would thicken and harden. All right, it would be bitter, syrupy, and unpalatable. I think this is what Paul's talking about when he tells Timothy to drink a little wine for his stomach's sake.
Be that part?
Yep. It would settle the tummy. Okay.
Be more like a medicine.
Yes. All right. So wine settled on its lees is a figure for undisturbed peace. So he's going to punish those that think that they're at peace. Peace, peace, when there is no peace. All right, another group under this group, all sinners, is those who says the Lord will not do good, neither will he do evil. Complacency. All right. The promises or the threats meant anything to them.
Didn't mean anything.
That's right. God was irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
See, they were wealthy and they didn't need God. As you look at verse 13. Therefore their goods shall become a booty, and their houses a desolation. They shall build a house and not inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and will not drink the wine thereof. Okay, they didn't think they needed God, and it would be spoiled by the enemy. You up with me?
Mm-hmm.
All right, the magnificent houses would become a desolate. These land barons would long for the fruit of their wealth. But they never would get to live them or eat from their vineyards. And they would be beautiful vineyards. They would be destroyed. I think we'll stop right there for tonight. Maybe a little bit early, but we'll still stop right there. And we'll take up then, and we'll finish up this book next week. I'll have a little test for you ready for next week. And then I'll have 2 tests for you for next week. And then there'll be a final then over all of it on the 20th. So we'll finish up then and get those 2 done. And then you need to get your work done. Those of you who are taking this for credit need to get your work in. That should have been in today. And so you're taking advantage of me, and I don't appreciate that. So need to get it done. All right. Thank you.